If I were to ask you, what are some of the greatest stories ever told? What would you say? War and Peace? Moby Dick? The Brothers Karamazov? The Super Mario Brothers movie? Well, if you recognize this intro gag, then your answer might be the story of a little-known indie game called Hollow Knight. In case you're not one of the millions of losers waiting for the coming of Silksong to relieve you of all your suffering, Hollow Knight is a popular indie Metroidvania game created by the Australian Team Cherry way back in 2017. During its release, and the many years since, yeah, don't I know it, it has been praised by fans and critics alike for its beautiful atmosphere, thrilling boss fights, and its incredibly sexy characters. Oh, and people think the lore is pretty cool as well. Hollow Knight, just as another game people like to compare it to, Cory in the House for the Nintendo DS, tells its story through less straightforward means, such as lore tablets, descriptions, or vague and mysterious dialogue. Now, while many people have relegated themselves to discussing the superficial, literal mysterious kingdom of Hallownest, I feel like that's not where we're supposed to be analyzing the actual meaning of the story/game of Hollow Knight. That's because, just like how the Lord of the Rings is clearly 100% an allegory for World War II, and it's basically confirmed at this point, I believe that Hollow Knight holds a similar allegorical meaning. When looking at all the evidence, it is quite apparent that Hollow Knight, as innocent as it may seem, is truly an allegory for the history of white imperialism and oppressive racism, and how it ultimately leads to nothing but more destruction. So get ready, Gadies and gentlemen, as I crack this nearly 7-year-old case wide open. Now I know you're probably thinking GameK. Yes, that is how you pronounce my channel name. Hollow Knight is a game about fictional magic bugs and liquidy soul goop. How can it be about the very real tragedies that white imperialism caused? What gave you any inclination about that? Well, I'm glad you asked, made-up rhetorical viewer. Let me introduce you to Exhibit A. First of all, he's literally called the Pale King. I mean, I feel like if there is some blatant distinction between regular king and a pale one for some reason, that should be of note. The Pale King is also one of the 2 known pale beings, both of which are considered to be higher beings by both the community and Team Cherry in the Reddit AMA, a phrase originally written on the lore tablets in the King's Pass. As stated in that AMA, higher beings are ones that, quote, exist above all others. Then there's also Pale Ore, which we'll probably talk about later. So, let me get this straight. Pale beings, which are higher beings that are better than all of the other beings, play an important role in the creation of the kingdom. Magic fantasy lore building, or racist dog whistling? Before I go too far off the deep end, let's just take a look at what the Pale King actually does throughout the story. Maybe he's just white and normal, like me. To do that, we'll need to compare what Hallownest was like before and after the arrival of PK, which is how I write Pale King in the script. I might say that occasionally. Before the Pale King's arrival in Hallownest, everyone was kind of just chilling in their own separate corners. The Moth people are fine worshipping their moth god Radiance, the Mothskin are cool to just mess around with the Mantis people were just cool to be violently homophobic, and the Spider people were... I don't think I want to know. What I do know about the Pale King is that he established himself quickly as the ruler of Hallownest, unifying bugs under his so-called beacon, as per the lore. I don't know why he decided to write lore on eggs, not really sure how that works. I mean, Lem seems to think that eggs are a prime way to store information, but I don't know, I guess it takes a more advanced mind than me to figure this out. Anyway, he quickly inserted himself into the role of a divine king figure, supposedly taming the savagery of local populations, as per the Elegy of Hallownest, written by the biggest PK meat writer you will ever see. Quote, "In wilds beyond they speak your name with reverence and regret, for none could tame our savage souls, yet you the challenge met. Under palest watch you taught we changed, base instincts were redeemed. A world you gave to bug and beast, as they had never dreamed." I know, stellar performance, as always. Thank you. No, hold the applause, please. We also know that the Pale King, during this time period, forcefully claimed many of the lands of Hallownest for himself and his kingdom. To quote a lore tablet in Greenpath, now the Queen's Gardens, "Though once our land, a pale being lays claims to the caverns ahead. Be wary to wander that place." So let's recap what we have on everyone's favorite worm turned conquistador. He was a pale being who forcefully laid claim to the lands of the local population and allegedly tamed their savage souls and base instincts. That is a lot of quotation marks in this script, oh my goodness. And he also gave them a world they never could have dreamed of? Sound familiar? Well, if you're American or even tangentially related, it probably should, because it sounds remarkably similar to the history of imperialism in the United States, especially in regards to the Native Americans and also the Filipino people. Well, okay, I get it. That's a pretty big clown shoes claim, okay? Right? Better have some evidence to back that up, bucko. Well, I do. Kind of. Let's look at an oldie but a racisty, The White Man's Burden, a true poetic classic, in the worst way possible. To put it very plainly, The White Man's Burden is a poem about the Philippine-American War written by a very real douche named Rudyard Kipling. I'll spare you a reading, but it essentially justifies the United States colonizing the Philippines in order to bring civilization to their savage country and make them more like us. The white man's burden is the so-called responsibility of white men to forcibly colonize and civilize more savage populations. I mean, just look at this picture. So is it starting to click yet? Yeah, Monomon's whole shtick about taming savage souls and redeeming instincts sounds a lot like what the United States claimed it was doing to real, actual, living people. During American rule, schools were set up to educate Filipino children not only on their own history, but on traditional American values, American history, and American ideals, all taught in American English. The Pale King colonized Hallownest under his palest watch, need I remind you, and turned them away from their old ways. We also know from a little character called Mr. Mushroom that this is pretty typical of worm behavior. Because if you didn't know, the Pale King was a giant Dune Samward looking guy before he gave birth to himself and became of meeker shell, which is kind of like Jesus, but that's another weird comparison, which I'll save for a different video. This is some weird stuff. To quote the little guy, worms pull bugs into their thrall till ages pass and kingdoms fall. And yeah, you can say that Hallownest fell off. This is pretty consistent with actual imperialism and colonialism. While I wouldn't say any of these countries got messed up quite like Hallownest, except maybe some of those like African nations during the partition. I mean, India also famously didn't do too well under British rule, but I mean, there's that. But the Pale King did more than make them forsake their base animalistic... Bugalistic? No, bugs are they're insects, though. Whatever, their animalistic instincts, he also made them forget their own lives, their culture, their religions. When talking to Quirrell and Greenpath, Quirrell will remark on a landscape covered in foliage. He states that this building suggests some form of worship, though its idol has clearly been long forgotten. And we also know from Seer, who is constantly talking like she's femcel schizo-posting depressocore, how fickle my ancestors must have been. They forsook the light that spawned them, turned their backs to it, forget it even. Oh, that says forgot. My eyes are getting a little tired. Dude, it's like 1 a.m. I'm reading this. The Pale King, although not explicitly stated that he was ever forcing religion, definitely caused bugs to turn away from their native religions. Now, to talk about this and compare it back to the real but much less interesting world of history, we need to talk about the conquistadors, the Catholic Church, and a little something called the Spanish Inquisition. When Hernán Cortés arrived on the shores of what we now know of as Mexico, he encountered a rather large native population. When he and his crew first encountered the local tribe of Aztecs, they were appalled by how they lived. To the Spaniards, a so-called refined race of white folk, the human-sacrificing Aztecs were absolute savages, nowhere near the same high level of intelligence as the conquistadors. They put a clear level of distinction between themselves and the barbarous natives. They stripped the native Mexicans, as they would eventually be called, and forced them to convert to Catholicism, the dominant religion of Spain and pretty much all of Europe at this point, which wasn't all that different to the conversion of the Native Americans, which would happen in 100 or 200 years, give or take. This lines up pretty well with the Pale King's reign, converting most bugs into devout followers of the king, consistent with Hellenist history. Along with the Spanish conquistadors, a little bit down the line, came the Spanish Inquisition as well, a militant religious force that focused on outing heresy and most known for burning Lutherans, which the only difference between the two is that Catholics had the Pope, so pretty minor distinction to murder someone for. Not exactly sure where thou shalt murder all heretics is in the New Testament, probably somewhere between love thy neighbor and turning the other cheek. Anyways, this is pretty consistent with Hellenist history for the most part. While we're not exactly sure if the Pale King had a small military force to murder the non-believers, we do know that the lifeblood was substance that was considered taboo and heretical during the Pale King's reign. As Joni, the character that gives the player Joni's Blessing, a charm that replaces masks with lifeblood, was branded as a heretic. We also know that the Pale King probably didn't approve of the Soul Master's soul experiment, although he's more of a mad scientist than a religious leader, but hell if I know the difference. Another small historical detail that lines up with Hollow Knight is the veneration of Hernan Cortés as a deity. Moctezuma, the leader of the Aztecs, originally believed Hernan Cortés to be the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl, fulfilling an ancient Aztec prophecy. This historical detail aligns with the worship of the Pale King during his rule, evidenced by the king's idols that can be found throughout the game. Lem describes the idol as an icon of Hellenist's king, who was revered as both a god and a ruler. Made out of mysterious white material, these are rare and very valuable. Again, another correlation between the history of Hellenist and white colonization. But enough of all that stuff about the Pale King, my main evidence point. Let's hear about the next, and only other, big evidence point, the Radiance. The Radiance is the brilliant, quite literally, god of the Moth tribe that created and presided over the moths before the creation of the Pale King's kingdom. Steer is the one who gives us 90% of what we know about the Moth tribe and the relationship with the Radiance. I gave you a small snippet of her all my friends are dead angsty energy before, but here's a little bit more context surrounding the moths and their whole deal. Quote, "They were content to bask in the light and honored it, for a time, but another light appeared in our world, a worm that took the form of a king. How fickle my ancestors must have been. They forsook the light that spawned them, turned their backs to it, forgot it even. And so this kingdom was born from that betrayal. But the memories of that ancient light still lingered, hush whispers of faith, until all of Hellenist began to dream of that forgotten light." So, in essence, it's a pun. It's funny. It's essence. It's a dream magic. The Moth tribe originally had their own faith, but gave it up to follow the Pale King. However, they started remembering the Radiance and then started tweaking. Pretty basic stuff. So how does this relate to the IRL? Well, as I stated before, both the Native Americans, I know I only mentioned them briefly, and the Native Mexicans were turned from their native religions to follow some form of Christianity. And how, may I ask, does the Radiance re-manifest herself? That's right, a disease. Yep, Hollow Knight predicted the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the 2020 Nigerian yellow fever pandemic, and also the 2022 Ugandan Ebola outbreak, and also the 2020 dengue fever outbreak in Singapore. Honestly, just a very prescient video game overall. All joking aside, or at least like some of the joking aside, the settler of both modern-day USA and Mexico both brought European diseases to the native population, such as measles, mumps, chickenpox, a lot of other funny-sounding but not so funny diseases, and also somehow STDs. Anyway, just like how the arrival of the Pale King brought the infection, the white colonizers brought their own disease. But that's not all the evidence I have. I also have some poorly researched and summarized stuff from Wikipedia. This part will be a little bit of a rapid-fire round of, quote, evidence, so strap yourself in and hold on to your mask shards because we're going fast. First, the ghost dance. Just how the native Hellenistites, started returning to a more simpler, barbaric, or strange religion, the natives, especially the Native Americans, did something very similar. After the events of stuff like Battle of Wounded Knee, which you can learn about in the documentary BioShock Infinite.
You were there. At Wounded Knee. I can see it in your face.
Tell her, Booker. Tell her how We strode that battlefield like the heroes of Sparta.
Momentum started gathering for a religious movement referred to as the Native American Ghost Dance, a spiritual dance-based movement that promised to help return the bison to the lands, reinstate traditional American values, like Native American traditional values, not like football or jazz and all that stuff, wipe out the white devils off the face of the American map, and pretty much anything that was counter current United States. Sound familiar? What? Not really. That's actually a very loose connection and makes no sense based on very little circumstantial evidence that probably doesn't correlate at all? Well, okay. How about this? In Hollow Knight, the Radiance likely manifested as an infection due to being suppressed. The Moss Prophet tells us that light is life, beaming, pure, brilliant. To stifle that light is to suppress nature. Nature suppressed distorts, plagues us. Which, besides being a totally banger line that I definitely don't have inscribed on my desk, the real natives have a strong connection to nature, and they also didn't know what germs or viruses were, so they probably also blamed that on the gods. Hold on though, because I have one last piece of, quote, evidence. The White Lady, or Root, is a trying tree that is also sentient and can lay eggs apparently, which doesn't really make any sense, but neither is the mantises losing their wings when they grow up, so... Despite being one of 2 characters who had sex with a giant worm in the game, that we know of, the White Lady is also known for being white. So the White Lady is clearly a metaphor for the eagerness of white people to spread their culture and colonize the world. I mean, we can all agree on that, right? To quote the tree herself, "I still feel that urge, you see, I always will, a voracious desire to spread seeds upon the land, to propagate myself, to breed." Now, I don't know what you think of when you hear this, but I think of the British Empire. Just take a look at this map, spreading their horrible cuisine across the world. It's really just the worst torture method anyone could think of. I mean, look at this. What is this? Anyways, I kind of ran out of evidence for this because I recently started having a life again, so even more of a rapid fire round. Pale ore is described as having superior properties and being really good at making weapons. Also, it has some connection to the Pale Beings. This is relevant because white people had some pretty cool weapons at the time, so don't be surprised if you see a pale ore rifle in Silksong. Trams. The Pale King was apparently obsessed with making useless effing trains that go like 2 feet. This is likely a reference to the creation of the Transcontinental Railroad, and eventually, the metro system. And you know what? It's probably also some sort of reference to the New York subways. You know, why not at this point? Hera. Hera, the Queen of Deepness, apparently wanted to have a child with the worm. This could have been due to the fact that Hera was just a common beast and wanted a child that would be of high birth, so it's either a reference to racial prostitution or mixed children. Take your pick, I guess. Void. The Pale King calls Void the power opposed, which makes sense because the Void is black and he is white. Racism. To add a little bit to the end, because school always taught me that I had to have a conclusion. So yeah, Hollow Knight is definitely an allegory for white colonialism and the damage it caused on indigenous communities. This was clearly the intended interpretation from the start, so I'll be taking absolutely zero criticism, unless it's by Mossbag, in which I will bow down and worship him at his feet. I mean, the Vitruvian Grub is already proven to be tied to ISIS, and we can't exactly prove where Zote was on 9/11, so I wouldn't say it is too much of a stretch. Oh yeah, and Mossbag, again, if you're seeing this, thank you for everything, but like genuinely this time. I wouldn't have made this if I had never seen one of your videos. I too expect a 40-minute response video sometime between next week and Silksong's release date, so you have give or take 100 years before I actually get mad. Hey, what's up guys? If you didn't know, it's me, GameK, the guy who writes the videos, the guy who edits the videos, and the guy who narrates the videos. I actually kind of do everything on this channel. I just wanted to say thank you all for watching this video. I know it's kind of weird, it's a little out there, but if there's one thing that game theory has taught me, it's that your theories don't have to make sense for them to be fun. And this is kind of a tribute to Matt Pat, because I know he's leaving soon. So there's that. I also just wanted to thank Mossbag, because he's really the real inspiration for me getting into Hollow Knight lore. If you're watching this, an extra special thank you to you. But of course, a really big thank you to all you guys who are still watching. You guys are the best. If you like this video, you might like my other really long video where I talk about video gaming news from 2005 to 2023, or the myriad of Hollow Knight memes I used to post on this channel, which you can still find. Yeah, y'all are probably wonderful people. See you later.